as we travel across the continental United States. I am hesitant to embark upon a criticism of the foreign policy of the United States.
Oh, go ahead!
My heart is warmed. You saw Jeff and Gabrielle mention Ziggy in Iceland, the FBI witness. This is as part of a series of fabrications and falsities. In the first place, falling upon Julian. In the first place, issuing from the Swedish prosecuting authority. Sweden back in the 70s and 80s was known as a model society. Now, it's simply a place with a declined stature of lawful administration and sells junk furniture that brought disgrace upon themselves. Disgrace. The Crown Prosecuting Service embarked upon a conspiracy with the Swedish Prosecuting Authority to keep Julian in the embassy for 7.5 years. Julian fought 2 cases in Sweden to forward the case. The Swedish Prosecuting Authority under Marianne Nye and the Crown Prosecuting Service under Paul Close conspired together. We have the evidence. Stefania Morizzi, under a series of FOIs fought in the British courts, revealed the details of their conspiracy together in order to keep Julian in the embassy. Silly quotes. You're not getting cold feet, are you? That's addressed by Paul Close, the UK, to Marianne Nye, Sweden. Julian asked, could he leave Sweden? And Marianne Nye said, yes, that's fine, you can leave. And immediately Julian got on the plane. They stole all his computers. He landed in London. Marianne Nye issued a red notice. A red notice is issued through Interpol for the foulest of criminals. A red notice for a publisher and a journalist. It's grotesque. The Crown Prosecuting Service, in its show trial of Julian Assange back in September, have brought disgrace upon themselves. Disgrace upon a nation in a show trial, unnecessary. The Australian government acquiesces, doesn't do anything. Acquiescence over time accumulates to complicity, brings disgrace upon itself. The Australian government thinks that state-to-state arrangements make the Australian polity secure, when in fact what makes the polity secure is a unification behind the government in the belief that the government will act in the interest of any citizen who is unfairly done by. That's where strength lays. Not in some arrangements over a glass of wine between the Australian Foreign Minister and the Secretary of State. These things are important. The persecution of Julian, first of all, there was the Conventions of Asylum. 1958, they were put in place in the United Nations. 1973, under the authorship of Australia, they were ratified by the United Nations General Assembly, a massive majority. At that time, there were 10,000 people in missions in asylum in Santiago as Pinochet began murdering anybody who was in a union, anybody they didn't like. Lawlessness. Julian became an asylee. In that asylum was removed arbitrarily. You can't do that. There's a process, a lawful process to remove an asylum. 6 policemen broke into the embassy. They opened the door, and Julian was dragged out. 3 hours later, a confused man was put before a trial judge who said, "Oh, you're a narcissist." This judge, who you would assume, had a law distinction, not a distinction in psychology. All of these insults, prejudices and persecution were put together in a document by Professor Nils Melzer, Professor of Law at Glasgow University and United Nations Rapporteur on Torture and Unusual Punishment, after a visit of 3 hours length with 2 medical experts that evaluated Julian to see his conditions and concluded that he was a victim of psychological torture over a period of 7.5 years of calumnies, mobbings, smearings, fabrications, lies. That report submitted to the appropriate authorities in Sweden and the United Kingdom was ignored. No answers were given. The United Nations Working Group put together a report which declared that Julian was arbitrarily detained, ought to be released, or allowed to take up the asylum offered by Ecuador and compensated by the United Kingdom and Sweden. It was derided. They put out a supplementary report in 2018, February, equally derided. The United Nations came into being in 1946. In 1948, Eleanor Roosevelt chaired the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The first President of the United States, Herbert Bear Everett, an Australian. This great, magnificent civil structure which allows states to negotiate in conversation their interests, preventing the outbreak of war, is ignored and forced to near collapse. Iraq war, illegal. I'll say that again, the Iraq war, the murder of 1 million people, the destruction of all of its infrastructure, illegal war. This magnificent structure, for some reason or other, and I call it despair when nation states do this, because they cannot any longer find within their bosoms the capacity to negotiate the human and understand each other and negotiate a way through competing interests. I call it despair. That's what I call it. Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning released, as has been mentioned, the diplomatic cables, the Iraq war files, the Afghan war files, 10 years ago, the Guantanamo Bay file. The great American lawyer Clive Stafford Smith, a man with a giant heart, put together an NGO called Reprieve and went to Guantanamo Bay armed. He was armed with those cables. They're all in searchable form. Any of us can go online and search those cables, 250,000 of them, plus the Kissinger cables, and evaluate for ourselves and declare amongst each other and our friends and companions and raise the level by so doing. That's the CIA. No. Raise the level of our understanding and consequently consequently improve the quality of governance. 10 years went by, and slowly the information in those Afghan war files, the Iraq war, the diplomatic cable, slowly it percolates its way through the polity, through us, and our understanding causes the government to remove the troops from Afghanistan, to contemplate and move towards closing Guantanamo Bay and ending the Iraq War. The Iraq War, how did that end? One of the cables described a circumstance in 2006 where a group of American soldiers, I don't much like accusation, so I don't want to burden those men's conscience any further. Occupying forces and pacifying a country that's resisting are always in a state of extreme agitation and fear. In particular, in Iraq, the IEDs would blow their testicles off because they explode upwards. It's not much fun, and they lose their legs. So they're always in an agitated, fearful state, and they carry guns. Fear and guns means, well, you know the result. They went into a house and murdered the entire occupants, the mum and dad and grandfather, the whole extended family, the children. Contemplating this crime, they called in an airstrike, which destroyed the house and obliterated all evidence of that family from the earth forever. Upon reading the cable, the Iraqi government and the Iraqi people gathered up their courage. They had been destroyed, community, gathered up their courage and their unity and refused to sign the Status of Forces Agreement as a consequence. The United States and its allies, one of which is Australia, removed all their forces from Iraq War. Leaks stop wars. In the case of Clive Stafford Smith, leaks bring justice. In the overall sense, in the trajectory of time, leaks have caused the removal of troops from Afghanistan, the closure of Guantanamo Bay, and the end of the war in Iraq. Now that congratulations not only goes to Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning and the staff of WikiLeaks, it goes to yourselves because it's your understanding that causes the government its anxiety and to close and end these wars.